environmental issues. He's currently president of his own consulting firm, XRM LLC, and he's a principal and director of Lake Country Frackwater Specialists, a company that treats and recycles various oil and gas wastewaters. Mr. Sovas worked at the New York State DEC for 33 years until his retirement in 2001. For the last 22 years at the DEC, he was the director of the Division of Mineral Resources, overseeing the management and regulation of the oil and gas industry and the mining industry in New York. After 2001, Mr. Sovas joined Spectra Environmental Group as Vice President of Governmental Affairs and managed the Minerals and Mining Group. In late 2007, he formed XRM LLC, an environmental consulting group focusing on mining and oil and gas issues. Mr. Sovas was the primary author of the 1981 amendments to the New York State Oil, Gas, and Solution Mining Law. He holds a bachelor's degree in management engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute and a Master of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of Massachusetts. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. My presentation's about 2 hours, but I'm really going to get it down to 20 minutes or so. I apologize if some of the people, I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, so I'm going to be talking about a lot of things with regard to the regulatory and legislative history of the oil, gas, and solution mining law, and some of the other issues that we've been dealing with in the last 5 years now. The Marcellus, the regulatory history, the SPIS process, the roadblocks to natural gas development that Karen Matusik talked about, local governments and public concerns, and of course next steps and timelines. The Marcellus is a big deal. This is not a gas company and a landowner. This is a very big deal for the state of New York. It means gas supply for upstate New York for 50, 100, 150 years, a stable supply of natural gas. So it's incumbent upon government to make reasonable and good decisions as we move forward. It is the environmentally preferable fuel, natural gas. There have been technological advances we talked about, but it's also near population centers and markets. Both, we're the gateway to New England. We have storage in New York. We have storage in Pennsylvania. Extremely important to meeting the demand. And including, and natural gas in and by itself will create more demand. I mean, there are no pipelines in New England for natural gas, for example. So there will be more and more demand for natural gas as we increase our supply. And of course, more importantly, or most importantly, at least to me, is that it's in depressed areas of the state of New York and Pennsylvania, and it's a big deal for landowners, and it should be. And it's purported to be the second largest natural gas deposit in the world. Now, this is a map. I'm sure most of you know about this, but most of the development in New York State has occurred since we really have a tremendous history, 1860 or so. 75,000 wells have been drilled, mostly in western New York. And the reason why I put this up here is that the people in New York City and the Hudson Valley really have no clue of how the oil and gas industry operates, and more importantly, how DEC regulates it. Here is the Marcellus in New York. I didn't put up the Utica because we're talking about Marcellus tonight. You see the hashed area. And of course, you see Broome County right in the middle there. So again, it's very important to this particular region. The foundation of our oil and gas law in the state is the New York State Oil, Gas, and Solution Mining Law, which was really modernized in 1981. Before that time, you didn't even need a permit to drill an oil well in an old field area. You had what was known as a notice of intention. I'm going to drill a well over here. Here's my map. Have a nice day. So in 1981, we really modernized the entire statute, enhanced a lot of the spacing and relative rights, meaning you can't take gas from your neighbor's property, which is, by the way, different from Pennsylvania. They can do that. There were fees for new staff and superseded local regulation, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But the key point here is it was developed as a groundwater protection program. Very, very important. And in the 1980s, shortly after the legislation was passed, we sat down with the industry and we developed casing and cementing guidelines, redundant casing and cementing guidelines, meaning that you needed 2 strings of pipe and 2 sheets of cement for every well you drilled in the 1980s to today. Excuse me. If you were in an aquifer area, you needed 3 strings of pipe and 3 sheets of cement. And I'm proud to say, and really what we're talking about here is here's the groundwater at 500 feet, let's say. You've got water, cement, pipe, wellbore. Okay? Every well in this state was drilled that way since the 1980s. 10,000 wells have been drilled in New York State since the 1980s, and not one significant problem with groundwater contamination. Now, there's a big difference between fact and opinion. I'm giving you fact. I had an interview with a lady last week, and she said, well, that's nice, but. And I said, well, wait a minute, let's go back to what I told you. This is fact. This is not opinion. And just to make full circle, here we are, this is a vertical well, obviously, but the water is here at 500 feet, formation is down here at 5,000 feet, separated by 4,000 feet, let's say, which is important when you consider hydraulic fracture. Quickly on a timeline for the GIS review, as you know, I was the original signatory to the 1992 GEIS, which served us very well for 30-odd years. That's a generic environmental impact statement. If you complied with these conditions, if you complied with the casing and cementing guidelines, you would get your permit. And in 2008, as part of legislation that was passed, spacing Marcellus wells and handling horizontal wells, spacing for horizontal wells, Governor Patterson said, well, we never considered high volumes of water in the 1992 GEIS, and we never considered horizontal drilling. So therefore, we need to do a supplement to the generic environmental impact statement, which began the process for the supplemental generic environmental impact statement. That's what it is. It's compliance with the law. It's not about hydraulic fracturing. It's compliance with SECRET, with the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And we've progressed very slowly, as you know. Over time, it started in scoping in 2008. The last draft, close of the comment period was December 31st, 2011, 80,000 comments. And we have been waiting at the other end for a decision from DEC on how to proceed. And there are many roadblocks to natural gas development in the state. In the 2011 document, as Karen Tuzik again pointed out, there were many things that were not in the 2009 document. The New York City watershed was out, the Skinny Atlas watershed was out. There were a number of prohibitions and setbacks, prohibitions in aquifers. The only place, by the way, in the world that you can't drill a well in an aquifer is in New York State. Does that make sense to you? I don't think so. By the way, and if you look at Chapter 2 in the GEIS, you'll see that we've drilled over 2,000 wells in aquifers in New York State, mostly in the Jamestown aquifer, with, again, no incidents. So it isn't like we can't do this. But in any event, that's what the SGIS is now. There are a slew of air and water issues on drilling on surface, no surface drilling on state lands. There are a number of plans that need to be complied with, that need to be, as part of the application process, visual plan, noise plan, et cetera, water supply plan, water disposal plan. There's a million of them. And one of the things in here which found its way into the document was that there was under SECRET, under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, your application had to be consistent with the local plan, with a local comprehensive plan. This is new. This is brand new. The industry estimated that it would cost at least $1 million more to drill a well in New York. And if you look at the document and try to figure out how to get a permit, you can't really figure that out because it's mixed up. There are multiple approvals within the department and external to the Department of Transportation for road surveys and road studies and health and public service commission, etc. Now, I'd like to go back to supersedure because this is one of the things I think that is most confusing to people. The 1981 legislation said that the state shall supersede all local laws with the exception of roads and taxation. It was tightly drawn because of problems that occurred in the field with local governments encroaching on DEC's jurisdiction, frankly, because DEC didn't have enough people. And the communities, rightfully so, started to regulate the industry, which, by the way, created a whole bunch of safety concerns for people who really weren't trained at the local level. So, the legislation was drafted very clearly to supersede all local regulation. And included in that, legislative intent, certainly, as I was the person who wrote this and who worked with the governor's office to negotiate it and worked with the sponsors, zoning was clearly prohibited. Zoning was included, in other words, you couldn't zone something, you couldn't zone oil and gas out. And for 30 years, we implemented the law that way, and they literally had no problems in Western New York. Now, the new interpretation, which was included in the I think it was included in 2009, carried over to 2011, said you need to seek local approval and consistency with the local comprehensive plan. It was very vague about how you would do that and what the consequences were if you didn't do that. But the underlying point was that local government should have a say in drilling or not. Versus the slide before, by the way, which I skipped one of the important points. Well, I better not go back. Is that our law says you have the right to recover your minerals. You are a landowner. You have the right to recover your minerals, just like you have the right to recover your water from beneath your property. That's the law of the state of New York. And so when the DEC did this in 2009 and 2000, changed this important concept, which is central to the law in New York, it empowered locals to adopt plans, local laws, bans, moratoria, and there was a great deal, as you know, divisiveness in communities, lawsuits, and really unworkable situations for companies. And this has resulted, by the way, I took this off of one of the anti-websites, but it's a good indication of the problems in that there were bans, moratoria, local laws passed. Most of them were outside of the Marcellus, north of the Marcellus areas. As you know, most recently the Binghamton suit with regard to a moratorium was overturned. Now, there are three important cases right now that are winding their way through the courts. Middlefield, and Dryden are cases that involve zoning issues. And those have been resulted in court cases that are favorable to the communities. Both have been appealed. But one of the judges said, and by the way, I was the expert witness in both of these cases, and one of the judges said, well, my testimony was hearsay because he didn't show us any documents that said what I said was true, i.e. that there was never any discussion of the locality having the right to extinguish the right of the land, period. And so in the state archives, the lawyers found a document which essentially confirmed exactly what I said. And so that was then presented to the court, but it didn't make any difference. There's a third case now, which is the town of Avon. And that case deals with regulation directly. And there's a provision in Article 71 of the Environmental Conservation Law, which basically says, if you say to DEC, this guy has violated the law, DEC, go get him. And if DEC refuses to do that, then you can go get him, and you can name DEC as the defendant. And that's what Lenape Resources did in the town of Avon, and they have additionally sued the town of Avon for $50 million for taking for the wells that are in this community. So, adopting a ban, adopting a moratorium, adopting the local law is not without consequences. The bottom line on all this is that, you cannot have investment in the state if you can zone it out. In the Dryden case, it's a perfect example. Should spend $5.1 million to sign leases. The town of Dryden zoned them out. Who's going to invest in the community under those circumstances? And when you're subject to the whims of a town board every 2 years because of elections. So it just can't work that way. When the SGIS was released in September of 2011, they issued this map which showed the prohibitions and setbacks, and they said, this was issued on a Friday, and they said 85% of the land in New York is still available. I said to myself, this is not close. Can't be close. Believe me, I've worked with prohibitions, setbacks on the mining side. When you put down in writing a prohibition or a setback, you create consequences. There's no question about it. And on Monday morning, they said, well, it's not really 85%, it's 80%. And I still knew that that was way too high. And what happened is the industry went back and looked at their lease positions and concluded that it's really only 40 or 50% of the land available, not the 80% that DEC said it was. So what DEC has done is remove the drilling efficiencies by imposing these setbacks and prohibitions. And they've fragmented parcels, which will leave production in the ground. And essentially what they've done is they've created more environmental impact because you're going to have to drill more wells to recover less gas. Okay, I know that's a kind of a foreign concept, but if you think about it, the industry can drain 640 acres with a 5-acre pad on one side of that 640 acres. Now, they have all of these prohibitions and setbacks, and they've got a jigsaw puzzle to work with, and they're going to leave gas in the ground, and they're going to have to drill more wells. They're going to have to drill vertical wells as well as horizontal wells to get at that gas. So it makes no environmental sense for DEC to have done that. While this is going on, we've seen the debate clash between the industry, of course, which has questions which can answer the scientific, technical questions that have happened, and now we've kind of morphed into philosophical debate. So we've moved really from a technical document meaning the SGIS, which is what it's supposed to be, to a philosophical discussion, which is now politics. And unfortunately, this has resulted in a lot of people who don't want fossil fuel developments to occur, but really have no answers other than renewables or whatever. As the Wall Street Journal said, I didn't see anybody after Hurricane Sandy standing in line for a wind turbine. We need gasoline, we need diesel. No matter what happens, we need fossil fuels. Our economy, our lifestyle is tied to that. And then, of course, we've really, because of all this delay, we've now increased the attention that this issue has gotten from the national environmental groups, national Natural Resources Defense Council, Environmental Defense Fund, Sierra Club, Robert F. Kennedy. Does anybody know what FBIL means? It's former brother-in-law. This is Governor Cuomo's former brother-in-law. So I'll let you draw your own conclusion there. Then we, this has resulted in, of course, a whole bunch of no fracking activists and no fracking groups. And of course, then we have the celebrities, Lady Gaga, Mark Ruffalo, Mario Batali, who by the way, had a fundraiser and was cooking with natural gas. That's okay. And of course, the infamous Yoko Ono, who I don't know how anyone could ever listen to Yoko Ono, but that's another whole story. Now, in the category of you can't make this stuff up, Yoko's fashion line, this is not a joke, this is true. This bra over here has flashing LED lights. The woman, if you want to listen to her about hydrofracking, then you better have another thought. And hopefully I didn't embarrass any of the men in the room that want to go out and buy one of these outfits. But in any event, so what is our state government done? They confused the public by not making decisions in a timely manner. They created a lack of public confidence in our regulatory program. The Division of Mineral Resources has virtually a spotless record. We've been defending a spotless record for the Division of Mineral Resources. The 10,000 wells that have been drilled, not one incident that we've ever had, and yet that's what we're arguing about. And of course, this is, and I don't really blame a lot of people for being confused on this issue, because when you don't make a strong statement and say, look, this state has drilled 10,000 wells, there's never been a problem. If the governor doesn't say that, or the commissioner of DEC doesn't say that, then the people must think there must be something wrong. There must be some hole in the regulatory program. There must be some danger with regard to hydrofracking. Even though we've done it since 1940s, and even though we've done it widely through the state of New York. So what's happened, of course, is that we've got polls that have evenly divided the people, and now it's a little bit better in favor of hydrofracking. And we kind of thought at the end of summer, after things kind of settled down, that the governor was going to, or that the commissioner was going to release the EIS, but instead he said we need a health assessment now. And so in doing a health assessment, because this was originally dismissed as where is the exposure that the frac water, the flowback water is going into tanks. Where is the exposure? Is it from the drilling fluids that we've been doing for 50 years? Is it something else? Why is it that this is important? And so the Health Commission now has hired three outside consultants to look at the record. And one of the other points was that they wanted to strengthen the administrative record in case of a lawsuit. If anybody believes that there won't be lawsuits, you're dreaming too. But the fact of the matter is that now we've had this step in the road, and we've got another step in the road. So, in the last week, we've got a new hope for a decision, okay? Looking for a decision here from our, I always thought that my job as a public servant was to make decisions. And so now we've got new hope to it. And DEC, I never thought they'd do this, by the way, but DEC, of course, adopted rules that were consistent with the SGIS. They don't need the rules, by the way, and it's not a good idea for the rules anyway, to implement the SGIS. But a year ago, they decided they were going to have rules because the environmental groups wanted the rules, wanted everything put in rules. We never did that in 1992 because of technological advances, et cetera, et cetera. So, they filed for a 90-day extension. We're going to see published rules. They've already published the rules, by the way. And there will be a comment period from December 12th to January 11th. In order for this 90-day period to work itself through, they have to finalize the rules by February 27th. If they, and because of the way in which our seeker works, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, they would need to finalize the health assessment first, then finalize the SGEIS, and then finalize the rules. So that leads one to the conclusion that the entire decision-making process will be done on February 27th, barring some other particular problem. We will definitely have the toughest rules in the nation. Maybe they don't make sense in some ways. If you can only drill on Tuesdays from 9 to 5, and you know, we have to remember that we are in competition with other places, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. So the resources that XTO may want to devote to Marcellus, they may devote to Pennsylvania instead of New York. But at least at this point, we're finally optimistic that there's going to be a decision. I said this in 2009 at Business Council, that the Marcellus may be the greatest opportunity, economic opportunity in the press area of the state that we will see in our generation. Everything we've seen, you know, usually you see speculation, and then you see a result that's much less than speculation on the oil and gas side. This is just the opposite. It's a speculation was here, and the results are here. This is a very, very big deal. There will never be an environmental compromise in the state of New York. There never was, and there never will be. It's about producing clean-burning natural gas for our future, and our New York landowners deserve to share the wealth, particularly in the depressed areas of the state. And lastly, here's my contact information and Karen's contact information if you want to talk to us or send us an email or whatever. Thank you.